In the Vietnam War, some units earned fear, some earned admiration, but only a few became legends whispered about even by other professionals. Among them were MACV-SOG, America's secretive reconnaissance force, and the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, a unit whose silence in the jungle became almost mythical. They fought in the same war, moved through the same heat and rain, and faced the same hidden enemy. Yet they represented two very different ways of mastering one of the harshest battlefields of the 20th century. Vietnam was not a war of open fields and fixed fronts. It was a war of dense jungle, broken ridgelines, flooded lowlands, and hidden trails running beneath layers of leaves and shadow. The North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong used this landscape with remarkable skill. Men, weapons, and supplies moved through concealed routes, underground caches, and jungle corridors that conventional infantry often could not even detect. To fight in such an environment, Allied forces needed specialists, small teams capable of finding what larger formations could not see. MACV-SOG was created to solve a strategic American problem. The United States needed intelligence from places where it officially was not supposed to be. SOG teams crossed into Laos, Cambodia, and remote border zones to locate supply hubs, track enemy infiltration routes, plant sensors, capture prisoners, and call in devastating airstrikes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Their missions were built around speed, reach, and violence if things went wrong. They inserted fast, moved hard, gathered information quickly, and depended on rapid extraction under fire. Every patrol accepted the possibility that discovery could bring overwhelming enemy numbers within minutes. The Australians of the SAS entered the war with a different mission and a different philosophy. Operating mainly in Phuoc Tuy Province, they were not sent to penetrate distant sanctuaries across borders. They were sent to dominate a defined area through patience, concealment, and control. Their patrols were small, disciplined, and exceptionally quiet. Instead of rushing deep into enemy territory and escaping by force if necessary, the SAS aimed to remain invisible for as long as possible, watching trails, identifying camps, and striking only when the moment was perfect. Their art was not just reconnaissance, it was disappearance. These differences began with doctrine. SOG was built for deep penetration and strategic interdiction. Its teams often included a handful of Americans alongside indigenous fighters such as Montagnards, Nungs, or South Vietnamese personnel. They carried heavy radios, large ammunition loads, grenades, mines, medical gear, and signaling equipment. Survival depended on communications. A radio was not just a tool. It was a lifeline to air support, gunships, rescue helicopters, and command posts waiting to react. The American method assumed that contact might happen at any moment, and if it did, the answer was speed, aggression, and overwhelming support from above. The Australian SAS moved in the opposite direction. Their patrols were lighter, smaller, and quieter. Noise was treated like an enemy. Loose straps were taped down, metal parts were secured, and movement was timed with wind, rain, or the natural sound of the jungle. Radio use was kept to an absolute minimum. Where SOG relied on the ability to call for help, the SAS relied on not being found in the first place. They studied terrain carefully, memorized routes, used camouflage with extreme care, and learned how to leave almost no sign of passage. A branch out of place, a footprint in soft soil, or an unnecessary transmission could mean failure. This contrast did not mean one unit was better than the other. It meant each had been shaped by a different battlefield problem. SOG faced large, organized North Vietnamese formations protecting a vast logistical network stretching across multiple countries. The Australians more often faced smaller Viet Cong elements moving within familiar local terrain. SOG needed to go far, gather quickly, and survive violent extraction. The SAS needed to sit still, observe patiently, and strike only from advantage. One method emphasized technological integration and rapid response. The other emphasized restraint, discipline, and the near total suppression of human presence. SOG selection reflected the danger of its missions. Operators came from elite American units and were further screened for psychological toughness and willingness to work under extraordinary risk. They often wore no identifying insignia and operated in missions so sensitive that capture could carry political consequences far beyond the patrol itself. A typical spike team was small, but heavily armed for its size. Radios such as the PRC-25 or PRC-77 were essential despite their weight. Carbines, grenade launchers, claymores, smoke, maps, medical supplies, and demolition charges filled their loads. In enemy territory, they were expected to react instantly, fight if necessary, and hold long enough for rescue. SOG's effectiveness came from the fusion of ground reconnaissance with air power. Teams transmitted short encoded bursts on schedule so higher headquarters could track their status. If those signals stopped, extraction could begin almost immediately. Helicopter crews, forward air controllers, gunships, and strike aircraft were part of the system. When compromise came, and it often did, a hidden patrol could become a desperate running battle through jungle and smoke. Yet even in those conditions, SOGs gathered intelligence of enormous value. They located trail segments, supply depots, troop concentrations, and anti-aircraft positions. Their reports shaped major interdiction campaigns and helped direct bombing against the arteries that kept Hanoi's war effort alive. The price was severe. SOG suffered some of the highest casualty rates of any American organization in Vietnam. The Australian SAS built its reputation through a different kind of endurance. Drawing on experience from Malaya and Borneo, the regiment adapted long-range patrolling to Vietnam's unique conditions. Patrols of 4 to 6 men moved with extreme care, sometimes remaining still for hours or days. They carried lighter loads, often around what was needed for survival, observation, and a short, controlled fight. Their missions focused on tracking infiltration, monitoring movement corridors, locating enemy camps, and setting deliberate ambushes. They did not seek contact for its own sake. They sought information first, and only then a precise, efficient blow. Over the years, the SAS conducted more than 1,000 patrols in their area of operations. Their results were remarkable not because of dramatic firefights, but because of how rarely they were detected. They found camps, supply routes, and enemy movement patterns while leaving almost no trace behind. Their success depended on fieldcraft so refined that even allies sometimes found it surprising. They walked on routes instead of soft ground, concealed observation sites with near-perfect discipline, and treated stillness as a weapon. In a war where detection often meant death, the Australians turned invisibility into combat power. Although MACV-SOG and the Australian SAS rarely operated together in the same missions, they did encounter one another through briefings, base visits, and professional exchanges. At places such as Nui Dat, Vung Tau, and sometimes Da Nang, officers and patrol leaders compared methods, intelligence, and experiences. These were not dramatic partnerships in battle, but they mattered.
Good luck.
They were moments when two elite reconnaissance cultures examined one another closely. SOG personnel demonstrated helicopter insertion methods,
We insert here,
demolitions,
then move to
and
this grid
emergency
coordinate.
extraction procedures. The Australians demonstrated silent movement, camouflage discipline, and how to build observation posts so concealed they could remain hidden even at close distance.
Keeps the silhouette broken.
These exchanges revealed not
Good work
rivalry,
today. Kept
but
them
respect.
completely in the dark.
American observers were often struck by how quietly the Australians could operate, how little they carried,
Good training today.
and how patient they were
Yeah,
in
this
collecting
coffee
intelligence before acting. Australian observers respected the Americans for a different reason. They saw how SOG functioned under enormous pressure, how it integrated aviation, communications, and firepower into a single reconnaissance system, and how its teams survived in places where enemy forces might outnumber them many times over. Each force recognized that the other had mastered a demanding and specialized form of war. Their operational histories show that both approaches worked, but in different ways. SOG's most important achievements came in deep interdiction along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Missions under programs such as Shining Brass and Prairie Fire helped uncover truck parks, hidden routes, supply caches, and defensive systems across denied areas. Sometimes a single sighting by a reconnaissance team could trigger major air operations lasting for days. The Australians, by contrast, excelled in denying freedom of movement within Phuoc Tuy. Their patrols located Viet-SOG camps and staging areas, and their ambushes disrupted local command links and supply flow. They made it harder for the enemy to move close to Australian positions without being seen, tracked, and punished. What made the comparison so fascinating was that neither doctrine was universal. SOG's heavy reliance on radios and extraction plans would have been less useful for a patrol whose whole purpose was to remain undetected within a fixed province for days on end. The Australian style of extreme silence and minimal equipment would have been far harder to apply on missions deep across borders, where large North Vietnamese units could close rapidly, and air support was the difference between life and death. These were not competing answers to the same question. They were separate answers to separate operational demands within the same war. The impressions left behind in reports, veteran accounts, and professional memory all point to the same conclusion. Americans who watched the Australians saw men of extraordinary fieldcraft, capable of operating almost like ghosts in thick jungle. Australians who studied SOG saw operators who accepted extraordinary danger and compensated with training, fire discipline, communications, and the rapid concentration of force. Both sides understood that mastery in one environment did not automatically translate to mastery in another. What mattered was adaptation.
Bravo 6,
the legacy of these two
targets.
units did not end in
immediate
Vietnam.
fire support
SOG influenced the future of American special operations by refining methods of deep reconnaissance, air-ground integration, emergency extraction, and intelligence-driven targeting. Lessons from its missions helped shape later special mission doctrine and the broader evolution of U.S. special operations. The Australian SAS carried forward its Vietnam experience into future theaters across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Its emphasis on stealth, counter-tracking, camouflage, and small-team discipline remained central to the regiment's identity and influenced partner forces that studied its methods. In the end, the story of MACV-SOG and the Australian SAS is not a story about which unit was tougher, deadlier, or more elite. It is a story about how war creates different forms of excellence. In Vietnam's unforgiving jungle, one force mastered rapid penetration, technological reach, and violent survival under pressure. The other mastered silence, patience, and the art of never being seen at all. Both became exceptional because both adapted completely to the worlds they were sent into. And that may be the most revealing lesson of all. In a conflict remembered for its scale, politics, and tragedy, some of its most remarkable achievements were carried out by tiny patrols moving beneath the canopy, far from public view. They proved that reconnaissance was not a single craft, but many. Sometimes success belonged to the team that could strike hardest when discovered. Sometimes it belonged to the team that left no sound, no trace, and no warning. In the jungles of Vietnam, MACV-SOG and the Australian SAS forged two opposite masterpieces of the same deadly art.